Of the saintly persons who are constantly engaged in striving towards salvation, one who is in Krishna consciousness is the best of all. The Bhagavatam confirms this fact as follows. Yat pada pankaja palasha vilasa bhaktya karmashayam gratihitam udgratayanti santaha tadvanna riktamatayo yatayo api ruddha shroto ganastam ranam bhaja vasudevam. Just try to worship in devotional service Vasudeva, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Even great sages are not able to control the forces of the senses as effectively as those who are engaged in transcendental bliss by serving the lotus feet of the Lord, uprooting the deep-grown desire for fruitive activities. Bhagavatam 4.22.39. In the conditioned soul, the desire to enjoy the fruitive results of work is so deep-rooted that it is very difficult even for the great sages to control such desires, despite great endeavors. A devotee of the Lord, constantly engaged in devotional service in Krishna consciousness, perfect in self-realization, very quickly attains liberation in the Supreme. Owing to his complete knowledge in self-realization, he always remains in trance. To cite an analogous example of this, Darshana Dhyana Samsparsher Matsya Kurma Vihangamaha Swanya Patyani Pushnanti Tataham Api Padmaja. By vision, by meditation, and by touch, only do the fish, the tortoise, and the birds maintain their offspring. Similarly, do I also, O Padmaja. The fish brings up its offspring simply by looking at them. The tortoise brings up its offspring simply by meditation. The eggs of the tortoise are laid on land, and the tortoise meditates on the eggs while in the water. Similarly, a devotee in Krishna consciousness, although far away from the Lord's abode, can elevate himself to that abode simply by thinking of him constantly, by engagement in Krishna consciousness. He does not feel the pangs of material miseries. This state of life is called Brahma Nirvana, or the absence of material miseries due to being constantly immersed in the Supreme. Thus ends the Transcendental Bhaktivedanta purport. Om Ajnanatimmirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschata Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, continuing yesterday's discussion, which was also talking about Brahma Nirvana, Labate Brahma Nirvanam Rishaya Shina Kalmashaha Shinna Dvaida Yathatmanaha Sarva Bhuta Hite Rataha. So yesterday, we saw about the highest welfare activity, and then we also saw that who achieves liberation in the Supreme. Continuing the similar note, today's verse is also talking about who is assured to attain liberation in the Supreme. Vartate Brahma Nirvanam. So, liberation in the Supreme. So, there is liberation for whom? So, there is certain qualities which are being mentioned here, which are necessary for one to attain Brahma Nirvanam or liberation in the Supreme very soon, Avitaha. So, assured in the near future. So, it is an assurance, there is a guarantee that in the very near future, one can attain Brahma Nirvanam, provided they are having these qualities. What are those qualities? Kama Krodha Vimuktanam. So Vimuktanam, of those who are so liberated or who are free from Kama and Krodha. So these are two qualities here. One who is free from Kama, material desires, and Krodha, anger. Yatinam Yatachetasam. So persons who have control, full control over the mind. And the purpose, Prabhupada is also mentioning this, like people who have one who has full, who are self-disciplined. So as we also saw a similar aspect in the life of Narada Muni of what different qualities he has possessed. So here it is being mentioned as Yata Chetasam. Then it is also mentioned those who are self-realized. That means Vidita Atmanam. So one who is free from anger and all material desire, one who is self-realized, one who is self-disciplined, and Yatinam, constantly endeavoring for perfection. So this is how Prabhupada translates into the translation. So these people who can, who have these qualities of being free from anger, material desires, self-realized, self-discipline, and constantly endeavoring for perfection, are assured of liberation in the Supreme in the very near future. So this word assurance is very important. Quite often when we hear different statements from different people, there's no definite assurance that this will happen. But here it is being mentioned that are assured of liberation in the Supreme, not very far, not in some distance, very unknown time, but in the very near future. So in the translation, Prabhupada is mentioning this word, very near future. So if we all develop these qualities, then we can be also in the state of liberation. And let us look at what are these qualities and how does one understand them better. So qualities of one who can attain liberation. So the first one is Kama Vimuktanam. So Vimuktanam, one who is free from. So there are different aspects which a spiritualist or endeavoring transcendentalist must take care of. And one of them is Kama Vimuktanam. So Kama means desire and Vimuktanam means to be freed of. So usually the word desire can be understood in many different ways. But Prabhupada says that desire is very intrinsic to the spirit soul. So as such, there cannot be a living being without any desire. Then what does this Kama Vimuktanam mean? How does one can be free from desires? So what it means by freeing from desires means freeing from material desires. So desires which are unwanted, desires which are not the real nature of the spirit soul, those desires are to be given up. So let us look at the next one also, and then we'll take a look at both of them together. So next one is called Krodha Vimuktanam, that is free from anger. So let us try to pay attention to these two qualities as what they mean in more detail and how does one can attain that. So in other words, Prabhupada also translates in few places the word Kama as lust. So Prabhupada says that without giving up this Kama, one cannot really make great advancement in spiritual life. So one question, how do I understand what is this and how can I see a good example of who has given up this Kama? So Prabhupada gives this example of Arjuna. So Arjuna on the battlefield, he was thinking of the welfare of his kinsmen. He was thinking about his relatives, he was thinking about his teachers, he was thinking about the various consequences of the battlefield from his perspective. He was thinking, according to me, this are the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing. Similarly, in our life also, we choose to do various things because I desire so and so and so. So the focal point is my desire and my enjoyment. or what is satisfying to me. And this is the concept of lust. That means what satisfies me alone. As we see in Chaitanya Charitamrita, the definition of prema is that which pleases the Supreme Lord, which satisfies the senses of the Supreme Lord. And kama means which satisfies the senses of the individual being. So here, Prabhupada gives the example of Arjuna. So when Krishna is asking Arjuna to fight, and Arjuna is declining. So this kind of act, where the focus is on one's own individual interests, is called kama, or to satisfy one's own senses is called kama. Then how does one can overcome this kama? So Prabhupada also says that as soon as one thinks of satisfying the senses of Krishna, so the way to overcome lust is how to satisfy Krishna. So as soon as one thinks how to serve Krishna, then one is freed from lust. Prabhupada says there is no more lust. Then Prabhupada says that as soon as he agreed to the instruction of Krishna, Arjuna, he gave up his own lust. He becomes free from kama and krodha. So as soon as we engage ourselves in the service of the Lord, in order to please the Lord, in order to please the spiritual master, as soon as we do that, that's the time when we are actually giving up kama. Otherwise, in different capacities, either extended or localized, we are all driven by this aspect of lust because that is so integral. And we also see in the various places in Bhagavad Gita how it is mentioned that how lust is the greatest enemy. Because if we look at carefully what is the enemy for the spiritual life, so as we again and again see how lust yes. So here, Kamesha Krodesha Rajoguna Samudbhava Mahashano Mahapapma Vidyenam Hi Vairinam. So Kamaesha, so lust. So it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material modes of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is all devouring, sinful enemy of this world. So as soon as the living entity comes to this material world, the living entity which is meant to serve the Lord, which is meant, the function is to love the Supreme Lord, gets transformed into one's own, that love gets transformed into lust. And so unless this transformation does not take place, this is a root problem, that we are all meant to serve Krishna and love Krishna, but now we have reposed our service and love to different things. So this is a very important quality. And as we see, there are various instructions given by the Lord. And Prabhupada in simple words is saying that if one serves the Lord, if one engages in the service of the Lord, then at that very moment, one is freed from the lust. And Prabhupada is giving the example of Arjuna, that as soon as he heard the instructions and followed the instructions of the Lord, he is freed from the kama or the lust or the material desires. Then the second aspect is krodha. So krodha means anger. So anger is something which is very natural. As soon as Prabhupada gives the example, Prabhupada gives very interesting examples in his lecture for this class. So, so Prabhupada says, just like if someone calls someone with a dress, so let's say someone calls someone, hey, black dress, you black dress, or someone calls by some other description which is outward to the living entity, will that person become angry? So Prabhupada says that if one is not in knowledge to identify oneself with who he is actually, when one is not in knowledge, then he becomes perturbed. Oh, you said this about me. You said that about me. Oh, you do not treat me well. So immediately when one's interests are checked, or one is not glorified, or one is not given that mana, the respect that one is seeking for, immediately there is krodha. Oh, you are asking me these questions. Oh, you are stopping me from doing what I want to do. So immediately there is anger. So this anger is another characteristic which kind of disturbs our entire body, which disturbs our mind, body system. And then we cannot focus on spiritual life. We cannot think of attaining liberation. So these are all modes of material nature which are influencing us to be more thickly associated with our bodily concept. So this is another important principle that one should give up this anger. And as we saw a few weeks ago, that the way Rupa Goswami explains in Nectar of Instruction, that anger should be employed where devotees of the Lord or the Lord is being blasphemed, or the Lord's devotees and Lord are being criticized. One should employ their anger there. Just like Hanuman, who employs his anger to burn Lanka in the service of the Lord Rama. So similarly, we cannot be freed from anger, but that anger should be channelized in the service of the Lord in the right way. Otherwise, this anger can be very detrimental to one's devotional progress. So Prabhupada also gives various examples that if somebody calls me, you're a dog, you're a hog, but if one is self-realized, if he knows that he is not body, then he is not bothered by any of these things. So similarly, one who is in knowledge, he can be free from anger. And then the next quality that is being mentioned here is self-disciplined. So as we saw in the life of Narada Muni, discipline, obedience, and self-control were three wonderful qualities that are required for one to make advancement in spiritual life, to go back home, back to Godhead. And Prabhupada interestingly explains what self-discipline is. So Prabhupada says that self-discipline means to not identify with this body. So Prabhupada says that this requires training. It is not possible that without training, one can actually understand who one is. And Prabhupada quotes Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu saying that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu teaches, Trinadapi sunichena, tarorapi sahishuna, amanina manadena, kirtaniya sadahari. So Prabhupada is saying that this is our true nature. We should recognize our nature. Prabhupada is saying in the sense that the spirit soul is so tiny, it is so minute, but because of the false ego, the false conception that we carry, the significance that we ascertain to ourselves removes humility. When we achieve something, immediately we feel that, oh, it's because of me. It is me who is doing everything. It is me. So that the nature of the living entity, so how tiny one is, one forgets. And as soon as one forgets one's constitutional position, one cannot be self-disciplined. So, and Prabhupada is also telling that self-discipline means to identify with one's own true nature. That is, I'm spirit soul, and not to identify with this body. So, and therefore, Prabhupada is saying, Panditaha Samadarshinaha. So, one who is in actual knowledge, he recognizes his true position, and therefore, he becomes self-disciplined. Without knowing one's position, one cannot be in one's position, one's true position. So this is another important point, that we should recognize how insignificant we are in this creation. Any moment of time, we can just have no control. A disease may come, a death may come, or anything may come which can take away things which we are so proud of. And therefore, Trinadapi Sunichina, Tarorapi Sahishnuna, Amanina Manadena, Kirtaniya Sadahari. So this idea that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is giving, that one should think humble than a blade of grass, tolerant than a tree, and offer respects to everyone, and not to expect any respect in return. So this is a natural position of a devotee. So when one is in this position, Prabhupada says he is self-disciplined. So we should endeavor to attain to this state. And Prabhupada is saying that one who is in this state is actually in the state of self-realization. So, and Prabhupada also mentions in this regard that the real honor means to be recognized as a servant of Krishna. Everyone is trying different ways to get honor. But the real honor is when one is situated in one's true position and is recognized as a servant of Lord Krishna. So that is the real honor, and one must self-discipline oneself whether one is trying to achieve this state or is in the state or not. So next point that is also made in this section is that of constantly endeavoring for perfection. That is yatinam. I missed making note here. So Prabhupada says that one who is constantly endeavoring to come to the state of realizing that I'm not this body, that is called endeavoring for perfection. So everyone is trying for different kinds of perfection. One is trying to excel in some sort of programming, someone is trying to excel in some other sort of sciences, some other is trying to excel in something else, in business, something else. But the real perfection is to recognize that I'm not this body and to constantly endeavor for this. So Prabhupada is saying this constant endeavor is very, very important. It is not that I just made an attempt and it's over. No. Constant endeavor, one has to practice and one has to realize this fact by endeavoring. So this Krishna consciousness practice means how to remember Lord, how to recognize our true self. This process of chanting is a practice. So constant endeavoring in this path will help us want to attain liberation. So these are some important characteristics that one must develop. That is, one should be freed from anger and all material desires, kama, krodha, vimuktanam. One must be self-realized, which is viditatmanam. One must be self-disciplined, yata chetasam, and yatinam, those who are constantly endeavoring for perfection. So when one develops these qualities of these five qualities, then one is very soon he can attain liberation in the Supreme. In this regard, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada is explaining, is quoting a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, which comes in Canto 4, chapter 22nd, verse 39, where there's a description. The chapter is Kritu Maharaj's meeting with the four Kumaras. So in this verse, Prabhupada is quoting this verse to emphasize a few points. It's a very nice verse. It says, Yat pada pankaja palasha vilasa bhaktya. So, so by devotional service, so devotees who are always engaged in the service of the toes of the lotus feet of the Lord can very easily overcome hard-knotted desires for fruitive activities. So this knot of desires for fruitive activities is very, very strong. Everyone in this world is looking what is there for me. What can I achieve which will satisfy me? So any action one is doing, one is thinking, what is the gain for me? The first question is, what is the gain for me? If there is no gain, I will not do it. If the gain goes to someone else, I will not at all do it. I will stop it somewhere or other. So the idea is, how can I act in a way where my glorification, my results increase exponentially? And in other words, in spiritual terms, the idea of there is no recognition beyond one's own self, or maybe extended self. And because this is very difficult, there are different kinds of people who endeavor to overcome this tendency of fruitive desires or fruitive activities. And who are those people? The jnanis and yogis. Although trying to stop the waves of sense gratification, cannot do so. Therefore, you are advised to engage in the devotional service of Krishna, the son of Vasudeva. So in the beginning of this purport, Prabhupada is mentioning that there are different kinds of people who are trying to attain liberation or salvation. So there are different kinds of people who are trying to achieve this thing. But who can actually achieve, or what is the easiest way? Prabhupada is saying that is activities in Krishna consciousness is actually the easiest way. And Prabhupada is quoting this verse to again clarify that it is, so those who are engaged in the service of the Lord, the lotus feet of the Lord, the toes of the lotus feet of the Lord can very easily overcome hard-knotted desires of fruitive activities. So this desire for fruitive activities cannot go unless one takes devotional service of the Lord, unless one does not serve the toes of the lotus feet of the Lord. And for others, we are not talking about karmis. Karmis are those who are interested in only sense gratification. But beyond the karmis, there are the jnanis and yogis. Even for them, it is not possible to stop the waves of sense gratification. So this tendency of karma or sense gratification, lust, is so strong. This force is very, very strong. One cannot overcome this force by artificial means. Even the jnanis, so just one verse before this verse, the Prabhupada explains a lot of aspects of the impersonal realization and how they consider that there is nothing outside impersonal Brahman, and that everything else, the separation from impersonal Brahman, is Maya. And they give different examples like the rope and snake. And Prabhupada is saying that these words, which represent Vivartavada, are specifically mentioned here, and they try to support these arguments, the jnanis. But even for them who think that although they are slightly better than the karmis, so the karmis thinks by accumulating material things I will be happy. The jnani is thinking that there is no value in the material life, so they do not give any importance. Although Prabhupada says they may be slightly better in terms of happiness, but they still cannot give up the waves of sense gratification. And Prabhupada further says that the yogis who are trying to meditate on the Paramatma feature of the Lord, who is transcendental, who is always liberated, who is free from any material contamination, all the yogis are meditating on that Supreme Lord as Paramatma. Still, it is the process by which they try to stop the senses is very, very hard, is very difficult. But when it comes to devotees, if they simply engage in the devotional service of Lord Krishna, the son of Vasudeva, then it becomes very, very easy to control these desires of fruitive activities. Otherwise, this simple act of controlling the desires is very, very difficult. So Prabhupada writes here that the jnanis, yogis, and bhaktas, all of them attempt to overcome the influence of the senses, which is compared to the incessant waves of a river. So just like the waves of a river, they are constantly flowing, they are constantly coming. How can one stop such waves? It's very difficult. So many of them. Similarly, the living entity is also bombarded with various desires, unlimited desires. And usually the living entity falls prey that, oh, I desired this should happen. This is my desire, I will achieve it, I will try to achieve it. And therefore, in this process, it does not recognize anything else beyond this. Whether is this the right desire? Is this desire going to entangle me, or is this desire going to free me? There is no conception. And therefore, as soon as the desires come, the living entities wants to chase. In the karmi, in the life of karmi, he wants to get as many desires as much fulfilled. That's why they call it checklist or something, bucket list or something. I visited this place, I did that. So many things. Because they think more I satisfy my desires, which come to me, then I will lead a happy life. Then there are jnanis who think that I can stop these artificial waves by trying to not do anything artificially. But artificially, one cannot stop the waves of desire. The force of these waves of desire is so strong that one cannot remain neutral for a long time. Just like Prabhupada gives example that in order to stop a crying child, you have to give something positive. You cannot artificially make the child stop crying. So similarly, the jnanis may also employ some ways to stop these waves of desire for material enjoyment, but it is actually difficult unless one takes to bhakti yoga. So Prabhupada says, why so? Why is that the devotees are able to do that while the others are not able to do that? The bhaktas, by their transcendental devotional service unto the lotus feet of the Lord, become so overwhelmed with transcendental bliss that automatically their desires for material enjoyment stop. So anyone who is engaged in the service of the lotus feet of the Lord, they are overwhelmed with transcendental bliss, that automatically their desires for material enjoyment stop. So because of having something so wonderful, so overwhelmed with the transcendental bliss obtained in this devotional service of the Lord, that material enjoyment stops. The desire, there is spiritual desire to serve the Lord more and more, but there is no material desire. Whereas on the other hand, those who are not attached to the lotus feet of the Lord, who are not engaged in the service of the Lord, it is simply struggle against the waves of desire. And in this verse, it is described as Rikta Matayaha, which means devoid of devotional service. So, although these jnanis and yogis are trying to free themselves from the desires of material activities, actually become more and more entangled in false philosophical speculation or strenuous attempts to stop the activities of the senses. So if one is really trying to assess oneself, how am I going onto the path of liberation? One has to check one's desires. And the desires cannot be artificially taken away. The material desires one cannot artificially stop unless one takes to the devotional service. And Prabhupada also quotes here, Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Janayati Asu Vairagyam Jnanam Chayat Ahetukam. So it is said that as soon as one renders service, Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Janayati Asu Vairagyam Jnanam Chayat Ahetukam. As soon as one is engaged in the devotional service of the Lord, the two byproducts, Jnana and Vairagya, knowledge that this temporary material world, what am I supposed to do with this? Why am I trying to endeavor to achieve different things in this space when I'm supposed to aim to go back to home, back to Godhead, and my life is in the spiritual world? So immediately that knowledge comes in. Simultaneously, the Vairagya, the detachment from the material activities, material desires also comes in. Otherwise, one is always thinking in different philosophical ways or in speculative ways to achieve something in the material world. So that Jnana and Vairagya does not come. So Prabhupada says, as long as one will continue to artificially stop the waves of desires, you will certainly be defeated. That is indicated in this verse. Desires for fruitive activities are strongly rooted, but the trees of desire can be uprooted completely by devotional service, because devotional service employs superior desire. So just like Param Drishtva Nivartate, higher taste, one can give up the lower taste by higher taste. Similarly, by having superior desires, one can give up the lower desires. One has to desire the supreme in order not to be entangled in inferior desires. This is another very important point. If one wants not to be entangled in the inferior desires, the only option is that one should desire for supreme. One should desire to be engaged in the service of the Supreme. If that desire is not there, one is entangled in the lower desires. So, and Prabhupada in another place also mentions that the desire of the devotee. So, devotee, whereas a karmi is desiring for material enjoyment, a jnani is trying to become one with the Supreme Brahman, and the yogis is trying to attain different mystic powers. And while, so they're all, Prabhupada says, are trying to be something which they are not. Because they're not trying to be something which they are not, they are restless. In the real constitutional position, we are not meant to be restless. We are not meant to be disturbed. We are not meant to be hankering for something, because we are complete in service of the Lord in our constitutional position. When we do our constitutional activities, we are meant to be complete. But because we are aspiring for something else, therefore there is restlessness. Therefore there is lack of peace. So Prabhupada says that a devotee, a bhakta, has no other desire except to be the servant of the Lord, which is his natural constitutional position, and because of which he is always peaceful. Whereas everyone else, because they are trying to become something else, they can never be peaceful. So it is Prabhupada saying, and the bhaktas, not being desirous of any sort of material enjoyment, become purified. There is no artificial attempt to stop desire. Desire becomes a source of spiritual enjoyment under the protection of the toes of the lotus feet of the Lord. So ultimate, so the Kumaras are mentioning that the lotus feet of the Lord is the ultimate source of pleasure. So simply meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord, remembering the lotus feet of the Lord is the ultimate source of pleasure. And simply by taking shelter of that, one can simply stop the desires of material enjoyment. So, so Prabhupada is saying, as long as one is unable to stop the desire for material enjoyment, there is no possibility of becoming liberated from the entanglement of material existence. So the desire is so root, is so important. So unless one is not able to stop the desire for material enjoyment, so as long as one is having even a tinge of desire to enjoy matter, one has to take birth, because Krishna is very merciful. Oh, you have a desire to enjoy material world, here is another opportunity. So one can enjoy this material world. So it may be argued that the waves of a river are incessantly flowing and that they cannot be stopped. But the waves of the river flow towards the sea. When the tide comes over the river, it overflows the flowing of the river, and the river itself becomes overflooded. And the waves from the sea become more prominent than the waves of the river. Similarly, a devotee with intelligence plans so many things for the service of the Lord in Krishna consciousness. That stagnant material desires becomes overflooded by the desire to serve the Lord. As confirmed by Yamunacharya, since he has been engaged in the service of the lotus feet of the Lord, there is always a current of newer and newer desires flowing to serve the Lord. So much so that the stagnant desire for sex life becomes very insignificant. Yamunacharya even says that he spits on such desires. Bhagavad Gita also confirms, Param Drishtva Nivartate. The conclusion is that by developing a loving desire for the service of the lotus feet of the Lord, we subdue all material desires for sense gratification. So we need to overpower these waves of sense gratification, the desires for fruitive activities, which are overpowering each one of us. Only when we take to the devotional service, loving service of the Lord, when we are engaged in the service of the spiritual master, and then we can overcome this karma. Otherwise, it is not possible to overcome this force of karma. And as we already discussed, Prabhupada is mentioning the three different kinds of transcendentalists, Jnanis, Yogis, and the Bhaktas, and why the taking to the devotional service is considered the easiest and the rightful way to overcome this waves of desires of material enjoyment or fruitive activities. So, and then Prabhupada, in the later half of the purport, is sorry for that. So Prabhupada is further mentioning about another verse which talks about Darshana Dhyana Sam Sparsher Matsya Kurma Vihan Gamaha Swanya Patyani Pushnanti Tathaham Api Padmaja. By vision, by meditation, and by touch, only do the fish, the tortoise, and the birds maintain their offspring. Similarly, do I also, O Padmaja. So this verse, Prabhupada is explaining, giving the analogy of how the fish, the tortoise, and the birds bring their offspring. A devotee in Krishna consciousness, although far away from the Lord's abode, can elevate himself to that abode simply by thinking of him constantly, by engagement in Krishna consciousness. So this idea of thinking about the Lord is not very easy to attain, because we are so much overpowered by our mind that there are so many thoughts come, but to think of the Lord in a day, it's not very easy. Therefore, only when we take to this chanting and hearing very attentively, only when we engage activities in Krishna consciousness, when we are doing service, when we are thinking, oh, this should please Lord, this should please Prabhupada, when we are engaged in that consciousness, and when we are practicing this process of chanting and hearing very nicely, only then we can think of the Lord. And here it is being said simply by thinking of the Lord constantly, one can elevate oneself to that abode. So it is not that one has to go there and then one can, only because one is so far from Goloka Vrindavan, one may say, oh, how can I become Krishna conscious? How can I become? No, one does not. The physical proximity is not the point. The point is our consciousness. Where is our consciousness? Are we thinking about the Lord or something else? And Prabhupada was mentioning to one devotee, he was thinking of leaving the movement because of some reasons. And Prabhupada says, it's your desire is not so strong, and therefore you're being disturbed by the smaller issues that are coming up. You're not serious about going back to home, back to Godhead. If you're serious, you should think of the Lord and engage in devotional service. And Prabhupada also says that if one simply hears, one should always endeavor to hear the holy name of the Lord, even though there are so many turbulent situations that come about. And Prabhupada says, but by doing that, one can be on a spiritual platform. And that person who is on a spiritual platform does not feel the pangs of material miseries. The pangs of material miseries are very hard to deal because the living entity is so tiny. Under the gigantic material nature, the living entity is so tiny, cannot withstand the miseries that are inflicted. But only by engaging one's consciousness in the right state of Krishna consciousness, that one can not feel the pangs of material miseries. And this state of life is called Brahma Nirvana, or the absence of material miseries due to being constantly immersed in the Supreme. So to the degree we are engaged in the Supreme, so as we also see in the Chetasa sarva karmani mai sanyasa matparaha buddhi yogam upashritya matchitta satatam bhava. In all activities, just depend upon me and work always under my protection. In such devotional service, be fully conscious of me. In the next verse, it says, Matchitta sarva durgani mat prasadat tarishyasi atachet tvam ahankaran na shroshayasi vinakshayasi. If you become conscious of me, you will pass over all the obstacles of conditional life by my grace. If, however, you do not work in such consciousness, but act through false ego, not hearing me, you will be lost. So, it is very important here to note, if, however, you do not work in such consciousness, but act through false ego, not hearing me, you will be lost. So, if we hear the Lord, as we saw in today's morning words also, Bhagavad Gita, So the word Bhagavad Gita, the words from the Lord, as we saw, that it was first spoken by the Lord to Brahma, and then Brahma to Narada, and Narada instructs Vyasadeva, and from that we are coming. Similarly, in that parampara, we are receiving the same knowledge that is spoken by the Lord from Prabhupada. So, if we also follow the instructions, if we hear to our spiritual master Srila Prabhupada, as what does he want us to do? What is that he expects us from? What does he expect from us? So, when we open our ears and start hearing, when we become freed from our own self-centeredness to becoming attentive to what Prabhupada wants from us, as soon as we hear Prabhupada giving up false ego, then we can overcome all obstacles of conditional life. Because in another place, devotees ask Prabhupada that are pure devotees of Lord more merciful than Krishna? Prabhupada says, yes. You have seen Jesus Christ, how merciful he was. He was willing to sacrifice his own life to preach the message of the Lord. So similarly, the pure devotees of the Lord are very, very merciful. So if we simply take shelter of them, become conscious of their instructions, it will become very easy for us to be remaining in the state of Brahma Nirvana, and thereby we feel free from the pangs of material existence, and also simultaneously be engaged in the devotional service of the Supreme Lord. So with that, I'll stop here and see if there are any questions or comments. Harish Prabhu, did you?
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhu, you said in this lecture about the jnanis or yogis or anyone who is actually doing what they are not to, right? They're not destined to.
No. So they're trying to be something else than what they are.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry. And in the morning, in the IHF group, as usual, there is one of the photos and from Bhagavad Gita. Every endeavor is covered by some fault, just as fire is covered by smoke, and therefore one should not give up the work born of his nature. O son of Kunti, even if such work is full of faults.
Correct.
Now, can you please help me understand how this is fitting in this current lecture? And even though we are trying to be devotees or uplift our current situation by chanting or whatever it is, but we ought to live in this life to sustain by all the kinds of jobs. You mentioned the business or a job or some employment or some service, but we are also doing which is not ours, right? Sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah. I mean, that's a disturbance from my son actually. So let me repeat this.
Yeah, I could understand your first question. Can you just say the second part? What is your second question?
Yeah, we're all yearning and trying to satisfy in our jobs or kind of sustain our employment, right? And that is also not, which is not, I mean, how do I know what is my purpose in order to sustain my life? Like, continue the normal being of earn money or the samsara or whatever it is when it is not my purpose. Aren't we actually doing what is not our nature or what is that? I mean, based on that sentence you told. Okay, can you repeat that sentence again, which I missed that?
Okay, let me go through the first statement that you mentioned about every endeavor is covered by some fault, just as fire is covered by smoke. Therefore, one should not give up the work born of his nature, O son of Kunti, even if such work is full of fault. So I think this is the 18th chapter where the Lord is mentioning about different endeavors, different kinds of endeavors, and how one should perform one's own occupation, and rather not give up one's occupation.
Yes. Yeah, that is what I was trying to blend into this question.
So was it in connection with the Jnanis and Yogis, or is it just a separate question that you had?
It's in connection with that only, Prabhu. I mean, I'm nowhere near those Jnanis or yogis, but at least I'm also trying to do what is not my nature or what is I'm trying to meet my ends every day.
Yes. So it is not that in the normal course of activities one cannot perform Krishna consciousness. So this idea of separating activities from Krishna consciousness so basically what is being aimed at, the basic aim is a change in our consciousness. Right now the consciousness, the living entity is thinking himself as the proprietor, as the enjoyer, as the true friend of other living entities. So the living entity is living in a very narrow consciousness without understanding the nature of the Supreme Lord and one's own duty towards the Supreme Lord. So one can perform one's day-to-day activities. It is not that one is stopped from performing any day-to-day activities for self-preservation. Self-preservation is not denied. The necessities of life is not denied. But in the due course of life, I mean, whatever one is able to simply perform, which is natural to oneself, where one can engage in some sort of occupational engagement, at the same time, do in a way which can help one progress in devotional life. So, dharma swanustitasya pumsan Vishwakshena kathasuya notpadayat yadi ratim shramayeva hi kevalam. So, if the occupational duty which one is doing, if one is not, it is not enabling one to hear the Vasudeva Katha, if it is one is not helping one develop the ruchi for it, when one is not helping in one's Krishna consciousness, then that is of no value. So anything which one can do to help one's self-preservation, at the same time, spend time for Krishna consciousness, that is the real gain. And as far as the necessities of life are concerned, they are very minimal. But our wants are so many that the problem comes because of so many wants, so much of social pressure, so much of future speculation, so many things we do. But as far as the basic necessities are concerned, by Lord's mercy, a devotee will never find any shortage. If one simply performs what is minimally possible and engages in Krishna consciousness. And with regard, I don't know if I understood your other part of the question, whether it has anything to do with the Jnanis and Yogis. So basically, for someone who does not know what is highest perfection, they may take to this path of different process of Jnanis and Yogis. But one who knows Krishna consciousness is the ultimate process by which one can find complete peace, one can be perfectly happy because of being in one's own true position. One does not endeavor for any other paths which are not perfect. For one who is not having any other path, endeavoring a path like Gnani or a yogi is better than being just a karmi. But for a devotee, from the perspective of a devotion, from the perspective of a devotee, these paths are not truly beneficial from what the devotion service can give.
Okay, Prabhu. Thank you. I mean, that was quite elaborate. Thank you. Pardon my ignorance. I mean, I couldn't frame my question properly, and that led to confusion. Sorry.
Thank you, Prabhu. Yes.
Hare Krishna. Prabhu, just one question. You have elaborated second point where you have explained about krodha, anger, right? So we should channelize anger in a right way. I mean, can you please throw some more light into that? I mean, how we can do that? Because sometimes we are getting anger and that's like beyond our control. We cannot even control that, right?
So basically, if you look carefully in this world, there are so many people who are of demoniac nature. Their whole aim is to destroy the idea of God, is to create system, is to create so many different ways of, for example, intellectual theories or some sort of various kind of propagandas to reduce the significance of the Lord. Okay. Now, if you look at them, okay, and if you do not become angry, oh, if you are able to do so much propaganda to glorify some wrong person as God or do something wrong so blatantly, shouldn't I become angry in the sense positive way to serve my spiritual master more intensely? If you are all doing such wrong things in the name of spiritual life or religion or so many other things, other people in much more grosser way, how much more I should be dedicated to this process and improve my life and also be engaged in the service of my spiritual master. So seeing them, one should feel anger. We don't have to go and kill them, but we must channelize them to make our own spiritual upliftment and help others take to this process, which is wonderfully given by Srila Prabhupada, as it is. So because if we do not get angry at those people and channelize ourselves to make much more spiritual progress, we will use that anger for smaller things. Or tumne ye nahi kiya, tumne wo nahi kiya, or something else, and that is unwanted disturbance. So we should focus on a higher purpose. Then the lower purposes can go away. Does that help?
Yes, yes, Prabhuji.
So another way is to positively engage oneself. So if one is positively engaged constantly, then the lower forces will be less. Just like book distribution, that somewhere or other we should be engaged. If you are not engaged in devotional service, kalaha is a natural byproduct of this age. Disturbance, quarrel is natural. The easiest way is keep completely engaged, no space. One must be overburdened with work and service. If one is overburdened with service, then the smaller things of life will not trouble. And our vision also should become towards spiritual life, spiritual goals. When our vision is there, then smaller disturbances will not trouble us. But if our vision is not in the right place, then the smaller things will create a lot of anger and disturbance. Yes, Jagannath.
Yes, so my question was also the same. That since we know that we are always be in the three modes of material nature, but even then, sometimes we are not following correctly. Means what actually Srila Prabhupada told us to follow. So actually. So my question was that how to control the anger, Prabhu. Same following questions of Ankit.
Yes, so I don't. So that's very similar to what Ankit Prabhu asked. I'm just seeing here, Prabhupada. Everything depends on one's practical performance of duties in an effort to control the senses and conquer the influence of desire and anger. So another point Prabhupada is saying that practical performance of duties in an effort to control the senses and conquer the influence of desire and anger. So as we saw yesterday also, yasyasti bhaktir bhagavati akinchana. So we have to engage ourselves in the service of the Lord, in the service of spiritual Master Srila Prabhupada more intensely. That the positive engagement is the easiest way to remove all unwanted things. Definitely anger is one aspect of it, but there are so many other things. Strongly engaged. And second thing is to simplify our life. Life should be very simple. If life is complicated, we cannot have time for devotional service. As much as possible, one should simplify life to the bare minimum. One's life simplification means in terms of goals, in terms of activities, in terms of desires, one should simplify them. If that simplification happens, then one can see time. And then one, in the association of devotees, one must engage in service. Without association, it is not easy, not possible. In the sadhu sangha, there is strength. In individually, we are not strong. So individually, and also if we intensely do devotional service, strong, constantly fully engaged, then there is no question of other influences or other thoughts or other worries. They will naturally go away automatically. So simplifying life and engaging more intensely under the guidance and association of devotees, I think can really help us overcome many of our unwanted qualities. Okay. I'll stop here if there are no questions or comments. Can I request everyone to come in front of the camera? Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Before I quit, I'll just say, so Prabhupada says the yogis have the power to take a pomegranate from another country. So Sukirti Prabhu was here some time back and he has moved to another place very soon. Just thinking about even though Prabhupada says they can do such feats, they are not always peaceful. So anyways, thank you all for joining. Srila Prabhupada ki, Bhagavad Gita ki. Jai. Jai Premanande. Hari Hari.
Hari Bol.
Hari.